While you may already know some of the tips, tricks, and tools in this section of the class, maybe you just haven't gotten in the habit of using them, or there's maybe some that are new to you. The first tip is pretty simple, and it's just to utilize the hide, solo, lock, and shy buttons on layers. So say I was just working on this little green block over here with the anchor. If I wanted to just work on those, I could solo them. Or in a reverse way, if I wanted to not see these, I could hide them. If I wanted to make sure that I never mess them up on accident, I could lock them. And if they are all done and I'm just kind of going through and figuring out which pieces are left to do, maybe that's a good time to shy them. So when you shy something, it takes it away from your timeline as long as you have this little shy guy button set to on or blue. And then when you click this again, it'll bring back those shied layers. So they're not really gone, they're just hidden. So that's different from hiding them in this way with the eyeball, because the eyeball takes them away from the composition, whereas the shy button, when that's switched on, which it is now, once you click this, takes them away from view on your timeline. So all of these little switches are ways to keep a clean and organized timeline and composition so that you can do your work quicker, easily seeing what you need to see and not seeing what you don't need to see. For this tip, I'm using this fun project that I did of a bunch of fall photos that I took. So what I want to do with this project is just trim all of these different photos to like maybe 5 or 6 frames and then stagger them across my timeline. And if I were to do that manually, it could be quite tedious. So here's a faster way to do that. So I'm just going to bring my playhead to, let's say, 5 frames, select them all by hitting Command A, then do Option and the right bracket to trim them. Notice how my playhead was on 5 frames, but it trimmed my layers to be 6 frames long, so it always trims 1 frame after where your playhead is. And now with all of my layers still selected, I'm going to right-click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then Sequence Layers. Then it'll bring up this little box. I don't want to have any overlap because I want one photo at a time, and then I'm just going to hit OK. And now you can see that this staggers out all my layers so that they're one right after another. So now I can play this back and you'll just get to see all of my photos for just a couple frames each. Now if you had a different project where you actually wanted different layers to come in at different times but remain on screen, you can just drag your layers out. Obviously for this project that doesn't really work. But if your layers were staggered in the wrong direction than what you wanted, well, the way that you select your layers actually matters. So let's just undo. So this time I'm going to select starting from the bottom and then going all the way up to the top. So whichever layer you select first will be the first one in your sequence. Now when I right click, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers, and hit OK, you can see that they're sequenced in the other direction. So from the bottom layer to the top. So just keep in mind that whichever layer you select first will be the first one in the sequence. Another tip for you is if you're sliding layers around in your timeline and you want them to snap to the beginning and ends of other layers, if you hold down Shift, it'll nicely snap into place. While this class is not about plugins or add-ons for After Effects, I should mention one because it's really helpful when staggering layers. And this is called Dojo Shifter. So if I wanted to randomly stagger these layers, because this order is kind of chronological order of how I took them, and maybe I just kind of want to mix it up a little bit, well, Dojo Shifter has a setting for that, as well as a bunch of other things that you can do that you can't do as easily with just After Effects. So let me just take all of these layers, line them back up at the beginning, and then I'm going to use Dojo Shifter to choose random. I've offset by 6 frames. You could also offset individual keyframes and a bunch of other things. But then if I hit stagger, you can see that this has just randomly mixed up all of these layers, but there's none that are overlapping and there should be no blank spaces. Here's a tip for working with shape layers. So say you want to have a square that turns into a circle, or vice versa. So you could draw out a rectangle and then convert this path to a Bezier path, and then try to smooth these out by using the Convert Vertex tool and then animating them into a circle. But that is going to be a lot of work. So instead, let's undo all of that and make sure that our rectangle is a rectangle path. And then from here, we can just toggle down rectangle path and turn up the rounded corners. And now we have a circle. So you could animate this property to go from a circle back to a square and vice versa. You could also obviously do the same thing with different kinds of shapes like rectangles to ovals, or maybe even like stars to circles and stuff like that. One other example of using the rounded corners tool is you can make a shape that's some kind of organic shape, and say this was like the bell of my jellyfish. Now, just a warning, this is not exactly how I animated the jellyfish, but I'll do a separate tutorial if you're interested in that. But say I'm trying to make like this bell-shaped body of the jellyfish. So I've drawn out this really clunky shape, and now if I go into my shape and go to add round corners and bring this value up, now I have a nice organic shape. And if I wanted to animate this, kind of like the animation of the jellyfish, like swimming, I could set keyframes on the path property, and then I have a lot less anchor points to work with than if I had made this smooth shape and had a bunch of different anchor points in order to make this nice and smooth. And with less anchor points, it's easier to animate. So I can just move a couple and it's still going to be smooth thanks to that rounded corners effect. So just like that, I have a simple little animation that didn't take much time at all and still looks pretty decent.